welcome to Paperback Flicks.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Ruth Craddock,
I'm Rae Davidson.
and we're here again on Paperback Flicks. This time we're talking about Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This is a classic novel. It is a massive novel. Um, was it like 35 hours to listen to or some
Um,
something
so
like
mine was almost 24 hours.
oh wow.
The one that I had.
Yeah. So it's a long, long book. I have read this before. This is your first time reading it?
Yes, so I've started reading it a couple of times, like physically reading it, and I never got very far because I used to get annoyed when they would spend pages and pages and pages describing the place or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then this time I actually found I really like that, so.
Yeah, I think you get older, certain things grow on you, or you get more used to the atmosphere and everything.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, there were some things I forgot that were in the book, so it was kind of fun reading it again because I think it's been at least probably been 20 years since I've read it. So it's weird to think that it's been 20 years since I've done anything. I know I'm going to be 42 soon, but I still don't feel like I'm 40. I feel like I'm 20 something.
That's the same with me, so I get you.
I just had my oldest kid graduate from high school on Friday. So I feel like a decade older already.
Yep.
Yeah, I just don't feel like I should be old enough to be able to say that. But I know you know how I feel because you've had a graduate. So
Yep.
when is your next child graduate?
Well, so that same one, my oldest, she just graduated from her vocational training the other day, and she's going on to further audio science
Yeah, okay.
stuff. But so she just had a re-graduation, her
Oh,
second graduation. And then 27, 2027. That'll be
okay.
my next one.
Couple of years. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got like 3 years until my next one does. But
Yep.
still, it's wow.
It is weird.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It is. It definitely ages you. I think I might start getting white hairs if I didn't color it all the time.
Well, so that kind of actually leads me to something that was I had never realized how young Scarlett was. Like it makes sense that like, oh yeah, 16 and she's talking about getting married in the Civil War era South. Like that does make sense, but I just never thought about it before.
Yeah,
And then I was like she talks about being like she's like I'm 17 and I'm a widow and I have this baby and I'm like,
that is.
yeah. I felt young when I had my kids, but yeah, no, 17 is young.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know it's not super young for that era, but it's still like when you think about it mentally, that's still super young to have gone through all those things.
hmm
Especially when she didn't really think very much about it when she ran into it. So yeah, look. Um, so yeah, she is very young when she starts out. And always identified a lot with Scarlett. And I know that sounds weird when you can take consideration how self-centered and immature she is. So it's weird to be like, oh, I identify with this character. She's an awful character, but I identify with her. So I guess what does that say about me?
I do the same thing. I don't mean to, but I can identify with her or I can empathize with her or whatever, even if I think she's wrong. And kind of like all the way through the story, she keeps talking about how she means to be like her mother. She means to be like Melanie, but necessity dictated that she just not. And she was still a child and she had a very childish mindset. And so the decisions she makes, like one of my main notes was this girl is her own worst enemy.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
she makes every wrong decision. But also, if I was in her position at her age or with her limited experience or whatever,
Yeah,
I think I might make a lot, if not all, of those same decisions
yeah.
or similar.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, I by the end of the book, I was like, she's ridiculous. Also, I get
yeah.
it.
No, I think we all have a bit of that overly headstrong. element in ourselves. Like I think Scarlett's, I don't know, in some ways you might say that she seemed like a caricature rather than a person, but I disagree. I think she's rather realistic. I think that's how I would be if I lived in that time and era. I think the problem is that Scarlett's ahead of her time. She doesn't belong to the era that she was born in. She
Mhm.
belongs to she'd make more sense now. Or, any time in the last 100 years would make more sense than when she was born. And she's fighting against an old system and old ideals that she's been raised in. And she's been raised to think of as normal and the way it should be, but it doesn't jive with her natural self and like the way her mind works. So
Yeah.
it's square peg trying to fit into a round hole,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's not working.
and she liked Atlanta for being new and modern in the old world,
Yeah,
you know. And so when suddenly that world was obliterated, she
yeah,
didn't like what it was replaced with.
yeah,
And like she spends the like three-fifths of the book just wishing that she could go back to the old world, like, and I kind of I don't I don't mean to do like I was not like, oh my gosh, high school was the best years of my life, but I do sometimes do that same thing where I kind of just wish that I could go back to maybe being that person. I don't know, I like who I am now, but like, like the nostalgia kind of feels like it was better than what I'm experiencing now or whatever.
yeah, yeah. I think,
So that another identity that a way I identified with her.
yeah, I think that's part one of the major things that Scarlett like struggles with is that she is majorly nostalgic. For all her flaws and her not sentimentalness, she is sentimental in that fact. She's very nostalgic, and she gets an idea of like this is how when things were good. And because that's when things were last good for her, she now has it all kind of like hyper fixated on that time and all the things that existed in those times. And throughout the story, all these scenes keep getting pulled away until the only thing that's left is Tara, and that's the only thing she has left. She doesn't have her dad. She doesn't have her mom. She doesn't have the old way of life. She doesn't have her old station. She doesn't have her old, all her bows and all like the things she's used to. It ends up just being Tara, all that she has. And so, in the end, she ends up with Tara being the thing that she cared the most about. When in the beginning of the book, her dad's like, oh, I'm going to leave Tara to you. She's like, I don't care about this land. Nothing matters if I don't have Ashley. And like, he's all, how dare you? Land is blah 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 blah. And it's like I get that it's like partially like it partially can be seen the obsession with land can be like a very materialistic notion, but I think it's also a sense of culture and heritage. Like
Mhm.
it's tradition, it's family, it's background. Like Tara became more than just having a piece of land. It became her family. It became this is mom and dad. This is the old South. This is the life I had before. This is my youth. And Tara represents all those things
Yeah. Well,
in
and
this land.
so you and I just did a an episode with the Nostalgia Cast guys
Mhm.
about Far and Away.
Yeah,
And that also is about Irishmen obsessed with land.
this land.
And there is kind of that like I don't remember if I don't little truth for everybody. I don't always remember what I say on these things because I'm just jabbering. And so I don't remember if I said this on that episode,
Yeah.
but I do have some Irish heritage. I have a lot of Scottish heritage and French, but there is also a couple of Irish lines,
Hmm.
and that like they came to America kind of the same thing with Gerald and with the people in Far and Away. They came from Ireland. One family actually came as indentured servants.
Hmm.
The white slaves,
Yeah.
that was one line, and then the other line, they weren't plantation owners, but they were in this book. They would have called them crackers
Yeah.
because they had a farm and they had to the reason they were called crackers is because they had to crack the whip themselves
Yeah.
on the slaves and they didn't have like the family feeling of slaves Um,
That's where
what's
that,
that?
I didn't know that's where the term cracker came from.
Yeah, because they cracked the whip instead of having like a foreman that was whatever. Like they,
It's like,
I don't
it,
know if they literally did, but that was kind of the,
yeah, it's supposedly one of the ancestors of that name. Okay. I thought it was because we eat more crackers than black people do or something.
it was whip crackers. But but yeah, I always kind of thought that was interesting that like here I am and I'm an amalgamation of like all of these different
Cool.
um cultures. Yeah, like both from Ireland, indentured servants and owned slaves. Like it's weird, but that's America for you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. We're a nice mixing pot of different ideals. So yeah, going back to Gerald's whole story about like how he came to America and you know his whole like how he came to be a plantation owner is actually quite inspiring, and I really love that aspect of the story. And I totally get why she respects the heck out of her father. Like it doesn't bother her at all that her father essentially was a peasant, and then he made himself into a gentleman. There's something very cool about that. And the thing is that everybody around him in the old South at first they weren't when he moved into the to Tara or the one Tara first when he bought the plantation and started building Tara. First they weren't like sure about him, but like over time they got to realize, oh, he's a really nice guy, and
Mhm.
he was really embracing the South culture and ideals and trying to become like one of them. And then he marries Ellen, that just solidifies it because she's a lady and
Right.
she's Robillard.
Yeah, she's old money.
Plus, she has all the gentility and all the goodness of what a lady, especially in the South, was expected to have.
Mhm.
And she's very Christian soul. So she kind of like rubs off his rougher edges and makes him seem more genteel too. And so then they have their kids and they're all kind of just solidified in that neighborhood. And I gotta say, like, hearing the way that the everybody in their area around Tara, like all the other plantation owners and like all the families kind of got along and did their barbecues and things together, kind of sounds nice. Like, as far as like their dynamic, like all the plantation owners and their families, like they seem to have a certain like rapport with each other. They were like, yes, there's a certain amount of judgment going on still, and a certain sense of, oh, this is how it should be. And I think you're going to find that in any culture, really. I don't think that's anything to get away from.
Yeah.
But I like the sense that like they had kind of a community and they all cared about each other. They were all supportive of each other. They're all there for each other, especially like when everything started falling apart after the war or in the middle of the war as the war's wrapping up. Um, and Sherman's army going through and burning down all the houses and destroying things, and then everybody ends up with essentially nothing. And, Tara's one of the only plantation homes that actually survives. Then everyone's kind of reaching out to help each other. And there's all these people that have never had to work with their hands in their lives,
Yeah.
know nothing about how to actually run the farm. Like they've been the heads of this, but they haven't done it themselves. They've watched other people do it. And now suddenly they're like, oh, I got to learn how to do this now. And what's even interesting is that even the slaves, they had a hard time adjusting because if they were house servants, they're like, oh, I'm a house slave. I
Yeah.
can't do that. And they're very educated. So they're used to doing educated things or serving in the house, but not like serving in the field. They don't
Yeah.
know how to do that kind of work. And they're really reluctant. Like, no, no, no. I have been trained specifically for this. And I get that, like, if that's what you've always been taught and they've lived for generations. It's the idea that you're trained to do this specific job, that's your job, this is what you do. And they take great pride until they've been very well taught to do this particular thing. And I get the sense that like house slaves were a bit uppity, thought of themselves as upper class, and they were special,
Hmm.
better than field hands and lower servants. So for them to be like something like, oh, I have to plow fields, I have to dig up, I have to do what now? I don't do that.
Yeah. It's
Like,
kind of like in in England, they had the upstairs and the downstairs,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
because you if you were just not good at what you're doing, or you weren't even aesthetically pleasing or whatever,
Mhm.
you were an upstairs. You were not seen. And then if you were a downstairs maid or a downstairs footman or whatever it was, then that was because you were the ones that they let the guests see that they had. You know what I mean? Like,
Fine.
and that was in at least the Louisiana area as well.
Mm-hmm.
That like if you were a downstairs maid, you were basically family.
Yeah.
And if you were a scullery or an upstairs maid, you were a servant.
What were some things you want to talk about the book itself?
So there are a couple of things that I don't like audiobooks. I just don't like them. However, they are very convenient. This book is a gigantic hunk of a book.
Yeah.
And so I had to do audiobook because I that way I could listen to it while doing other things. I have the worst luck with audiobooks. I don't know. So I know that in the film, um, Scarlett is played by a British actress, and several other members of the cast were also British born. Um, and so I knew that. And so I thought, okay, so obviously when British actors come to America and they do like an American character, a lot of times they do kind of go Southern because their dialects are somewhat similar to the Southern dialect.
Yeah.
And so I thought this will be fine. And this particular woman, I don't remember her name right off, that was reading it, she has done several other books. Like she's done, I think she did a couple of Jane Austens,
Mm-hmm.
and she did uh a Dickens, like things that she was great. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, it's the same name, so we're cool."
Mm-hmm.
And then she was awful. Like I did the same, I started doing the same thing when I could, where I would turn the volume down and I would just try to turn the captions on and just try to read it and have her voice kind of going in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't understand the slave Ebonics at
Oh,
all.
yeah.
And so sometimes she wasn't even saying word et mup didn't get mum. And I'm like, get mum. You know that word is for gentleman, and so it's gentleman, like, but
Yeah.
just weird. And then there were other times that she would just be reading it straight, but she would put odd inflection or she wouldn't understand what the terminology is. And
Uh,
she kept saying, like, Scarlett has several things that she says over and over again. One
mhm.
of them is, oh, fiddly dee, right? And everybody in America knows that that's how you say that. But this lady was saying it like she's telling you to go fiddle a tune called Dee Dee. Oh, fiddle Dee Dee. I'm like, what?
Literally,
And the thing, I almost turned it off and stopped listening to it. She doesn't know the tune to the Let My People Go. Like, even if most of us don't know that whole song anymore, we
yeah.
know the Let My People Go, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But she didn't. And so she just read it almost like she was reading like a Shakespeare poem,
Mhm.
but it was just weird. It was bad. I didn't like it at all. So I had to turn the volume way down and listen and read the captions as often as I could.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I didn't like that experience.
I can see that.
But as for the book itself,
Book itself.
I didn't know that she had other kids because I had never gotten that far in reading before.
Yeah.
And in the movie, they don't have the kids. And so I didn't realize that I kind of love that. I love that she had Charlie's kids and kid and Frank's. Like, I don't know, that made
Yeah.
me somehow feel better about her. I don't know.
Well, it's funny because for me, it makes me both. There are things I liked about that, but things also makes it harder to reconcile her as a person, considering she's such a bad mother.
She is.
I can forgive about everything else but the bad mother part. So for me, it was like, yeah, I get why they took that out of the movie because it one, it simplifies things, and plus it makes her more relatable and more less of a villain if she's
Right,
not being unkind to a child. Like it's one
right,
thing to watch her be unkind to a slave because that was kind of the mentality, and that was only like in threat, and she never actually whipped anybody. It was only
right.
because they weren't doing what she said. She's like, "I'll whip you," but she didn't actually do it.
Yeah,
But when it comes to a little kid, it's like, I don't know. I think that's something everybody can agree with is that as awful as the idea of being cruel to another human being is, I think it's worst when it's a child.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
I so I kind of felt like the moral of the story is that there are almost no good guys because the Republicans, the Yankees, the carpetbaggers, all all the obvious like bad guys of the story. But Scarlet, she's kind of a bad guy. The Democrats with the KKK and they're they're not great people either. There are a few that are like stand out, like obviously Melanie and Ellen, like we talked about, but even Rhett, like he's the one that, and Ashley, like they're supposed to be like, Ashley was supposed to be this, like, oh wow, he's amazing. And then she realizes, oh, no, he's not. He's just,
You're useless. You can't do
yeah.
anything but read books, which is
And Rhett,
but
Rhett is supposed like yes, he's like, ah, I'm a scalawag and a scoundrel and scoundrel. And
yeah,
like, yes, of course he's flawed, right? But you're supposed to see him as like, but he genuinely loves her. You're supposed to be able to look at it and be like, Scarlett, don't you see? Don't you see that he loves you?
he lives
No,
for you.
she can't see it because he is such a jerk.
He is.
Like,
He
yeah,
makes it so hard for her to actually like him because he's so here's the thing. He is so terrified of falling in love with someone. He does fall in love with someone, and he's so terrified of them knowing that he loves them and getting hurt by them. So he puts up this whole like armor, this wall that like, he's, untouchable. He, impersonal, and like you can't possibly get through him. But the whole time she's getting through, regardless of whether he wants to admit it or not, to the point where he just like in shambles at the end, and he's like, I give up. I can't do this anymore. But because he cares. He really cares about her. He just doesn't know how to be in a relationship because he's avoided this all his life.
yeah,
He's had all these reasons to, like let's talk about Rhett real quick. So the whole background with his father disowning him because he wouldn't like marry a girl he got stuck out in the country with overnight. It's like the horse, the horse, something happened with the horse where like the buggy broke and like
yeah,
they couldn't get home in time. And it was, yeah, she didn't bring a chaperone. So that's kind of on her. So like what was she thinking? But like, and then, they make it home the next day, like when he finally can get her back. And everyone's like, demands he has to marry her. And he's like, well, no, I didn't do anything to her. I
right.
didn't file her. She's fine. Nothing happened. We just had some bad fortune to have to marry every girl I happen to, you know, I guess so they're trying, I don't know. It's so interesting that they're so like about protecting and honoring their high ladies and their gentility and their virginity. In the meantime, it was very common for all the gentlemen to go off to whorehouses at a very early age. That was part of, they were like introduced to it as teenagers or younger. So that was just natural course. The man needed to know about these things, and they could, sow their wild oats or whatever. And I was considered, that wasn't considered dishonorable, which doesn't make any sense to me at all. But it would be dishonorable for the girl to be seen out alone with a guy, even if absolutely nothing happened. Meanwhile, stuff is happening at the whorehouse with these gentlemen.
Right.
But why? It's like so messed up, the double standard. So I get why he's like, no, I'm not going to just marry the girl because we had the buggy breakdown. And so then, like, the father disowns him. They end up, who do you end up having a duel with? With the brother or something of the girl?
Yeah, I think was the brother or the father? Yeah, I think it was the brother. You're right.
I think it was the brother, not the father. The brother demanded that he marry her, and he's like, no. And so then he challenged him to a duel. Rhett wins, and then his father's like, I just owned you, like, get out of here, or whatever. And so, like, he's been rejected by his father and, like, denied the right to be, in his ancestral home or with his mother and his sisters. He can't be, like, he's been thrown out. And, like, I can understand where his bitterness comes from, where he's like, you know what, forget it. I don't want anything to do with that kind of world. It's hypocrisy. It's stupid. So he just kind of like throws himself entirely the other way. He purposely tries to be as ungentlemanly as possible because, like, well, I've already had my reputation tarnished. What worse could I do at this point? Like, I might as well live the part. And so he's very bitter, and but at the same time, he does innately have honor in him. He is a decent guy. He doesn't want to actually hurt people, but he also doesn't want to get hurt again by showing anyone that he can be hurt.
Yeah.
So he's hiding all this sensitivity and all this goodness because he is a good guy behind this, sarcastic facade. And then, he meets Scarlett, she just is what she is. And yeah, she's trying to be a lady, but not very successfully because she is Scarlett. And I don't know. I think Scarlett's got Asperger's. I think, or like impulse syndrome or something. Where like she can't control her impulses, and she has a really hard time not saying exactly what she thinks and just saying things. Like she's very reactionary. She doesn't think things through very well. At the same time, she's very smart. So that's one thing that I found really interesting is that she's brilliant with mathematics. She can do numbers like nothing. And like, that's very unladylike to be that smart. And at the same time, she's very stupid about other things. Or she doesn't understand like inferring or like similes or metaphors and all that stuff when like Ashley's talking all metaphorically about things and waxing philosophical. She's like, what? What? So she's taking it literally. She's like, what are you talking about? Like totally confused. But she loves him, or she thinks she loves him because he's just so wonderful. And I don't know. I'm getting all over the place. I'm sorry.
No,
It
well, that's all right. So, well, yeah, so something that I noticed, like, so I feel like Rhett has a tendency to, like, he can't get out of his own head, if that makes sense.
okay.
He's like, because everything that he does, he's like, he's knocking the person down a peg, but he's also kind of knocking himself every time. Like,
He's making fun of himself too. Yeah.
yeah. And he just seems to like it talks about over and over again where she's like he keeps looking at me like he's looking for something. He's watching me. How am I going to respond? And she's like, "What? What do you want?" Because he's so in his head and he's, you know,
Mhm.
looking for evidence that she loves him or looking for how
And
is she reacting to this? What is she thinking about this? And he's making up these, he becomes obsessed with Ashley because she's obsessed with Ashley. He knew that in the beginning. Like their relationship began with she's obsessed with Ashley. And she kind of points that out at one point where she's like, I am who I am. You changed the math and you were asking me to change the math. And by the time I did, you don't want me anymore. Like,
yeah, like, it took me a while. Well, part of her problem is that she was holding on to Ashley as part of that time. And like, I do believe them. Like, we don't get to see before the book started and the Tarleton tell her about the engagement and right before the barbecue. But like, the impression I get from flashbacks and things she says about her time with Ashley before this, I get the impression that there was a strong attraction, that he did like her very much, and he did come and see her a lot because he did like her. He was drawn to her energy, and she is very beautiful. That's one thing I thought was really weird about the book. Is it starts off by saying she's not a particularly handsome woman. I'm like, I'm sorry. One, I'm not gonna remember her name because that's what I do. I'm horrible. The actress that plays Scarlett in the
oh,
movie is a beautiful woman.
yes.
Beautiful woman. And I always got the impression that Scarlet was a babe.
Right.
And
I thought that was interesting too. The very first line of the book is line or two of the book is about how Scarlet is not actually like pretty. And they're like, but everyone for the rest of the book thinks that she's the most gorgeous thing that's ever existed. Like,
she's got charisma and charm, or as they would call it now, Riz. She's got Riz
right.
coming out of her eyeballs, and like she knows how to play the game, and she knows how to wrap men around her finger. And which is funny because at the time, apparently they're really easy. Men are really easy to mess with in this time period.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so Margaret Mitchell seems to be kind of, oh, who else was doing it? Was it Mark Twain? We talked about how there's certain authors that are kind of exposing everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
so she exposes the Southern, belles as being like self-righteous, pretentious, know-it-all, know-nothings.
Yeah.
And she exposes the gentry, the men for being kind of also like super shallow, like oh you always ignore the first two or three proposals because men are literally always confessing their love to you.
Wow. Yeah. Well, look at Charles. Like she barely pays any attention to him. First time in his life, and suddenly he's like so excited. He's never had a woman talk to him or treat him like anything other than a little brother.
Hmm.
He doesn't actually want to marry India Wilkes. It's just expected that he's going to marry um, Ashley's little sister. It's like just the cousin thing where it's like Ashley's going to marry Melanie, so Charles has to marry India, and it's just meant to be. And I thought it was interesting the whole conversation between Gerald and Mrs. Charlton, the Charlton twins, mom. And I love that character. That's a character I would have loved to have seen in the movie. It's one of the things we lose from turning it from a book into a movie. You lose the Charlton mom and the sisters and the whole background with her and her horses, and how like you're not sure if she's talking about missing her horses or her sons because all four of her sons die during the war. But she was a very interesting character. But anyways, when they're on their way to the barbecue and they run into them on the street on the way to the Wilkes's plantation for the barbecue, they stop and like, even Mrs. Charlton points out, oh, I heard that they're announcing the engagement today of Ashley and Melanie and everything. And she's like, I just think it's weird for them to marry their cousins. It's just not right. And she's talking about breeding and how, if you inbreed too much, you get weak stock, blah, blah. And she's talking about it very matter of factly, which is supposed to be very offensive, inappropriate to talk about breeding in front of girls. Meanwhile, she's talking horses. Yes, it's essentially the same thing, but like, and I always think it's funny that like men are supposed to know all this stuff about sex, but girls are supposed to know nothing. Nothing. Like, did they tell them anything about what was going to happen on their wedding night? They're just like, oh, you get married, get married, get married, get married. Oh, and by the way, this thing is going to happen. It's
So,
part of your duty. Just kind of, sit there and let them do it, and then you get a baby.
yeah.
And it's like, what?
Yeah. So my nana grew up in Missouri, so it's not like deep South, but she had a lot of that that influence, Louisiana influence.
Mm-hmm.
And they she was not told anything. Like literally nothing. She didn't even understand her own anatomy. Like, you know what I mean? Like not told a single thing. And then when she got married, she was like, I thought he was abusing me. I thought he was, like she's like, it was,
Horrible thing he's doing to me. Yeah.
yeah.
If she's not
And
talking about it at all, like that would be shocking because
yeah,
sex in itself is kind of odd when you think about it in like a from a distance. It's kind of a weird thing. But when you
right.
understand what it is, and especially when it's supposed to be between a husband and wife and in a relationship, an actual love, bonding, friendship, relationship, then it's not weird anymore. But to be all of a sudden, oh, by the way, suddenly he's gonna do this thing to you, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
She's got no idea. She's like, whoa, like
Yeah.
you'd be just so shocking and so weird if you didn't know anything about it. Like,
Yeah. Well, and they talk about in the book, it's even vulgar to admit that you're pregnant because that means that you had sex. Like,
but obviously, if you have a baby,
right. You're also supposed to give your husband as many children as possible.
that somehow never be seen in public pregnant. So what's this funny is this idea, this notion of not showing yourself pregnant was still prevalent for a really, really long time. Even until like the 90s, like celebrities didn't go out and like do any pictures when they were pregnant.
Hmm.
I think one of the first people to do it that actually did a photo shoot was Demi Moore when she was
Hmm.
pregnant with her first child. And this is so shocking and so inappropriate. I can't believe she's
Yeah.
doing that. I was like, yeah,
Well,
women go out, pregnant, but it was like celebrities, you never saw their pregnant bellies. It
right.
was,
Well,
they didn't want to break the facade. And it's like, but they're people too.
and maternity clothing for almost all time, like European and then American maternity clothing has always been to obfuscate, to hide your pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that still sometimes is a thing when people are like, "Oh, look, this hides your belly, so it just flows away." And I was the opposite. Like I was like, "That's why there's a baby in here." I was so excited every time I was
Well,
wearing like the super tight thing that I can barely get on, but I'm like, it's like
hmm,
accentuating my belly.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
I
I
think
was proud.
I think it's harder as a short woman too because you carry it all out. We're both little women, so there's
Yeah.
really no place to hide it when
Yeah.
you're small. It's just
Well,
all
and
out in front. And like I had some people when I was pregnant, like they'd see me from behind, and then I would turn around and like, oh my gosh, you're pregnant. Like they couldn't tell from behind that I was pregnant. I was like, yeah, because it's all in the front,
yeah.
all in front, the entire thing. 'Cause, like I got no space to put it. I'm like this tall, like but like taller women can hide it like for longer. Eventually, it's gonna stick out, but like they have more space inside. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
I would say I was I was very I'm 4'11",
yeah.
and when I got married I was about 90 pounds. So there was nowhere for that baby to go. I mean, I ate a heavy lunch and I was like, oh yep, 3 months pregnant.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's
But
funny is we talked about when Melanie started showing and they had to go out and help with things, that they just had her like raise her hoop higher, the
Mhm.
hoop skirt. So then the hoop skirt hit it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of clever. Never really thought about that, but that is kind of a clever way to hide it. Not that I understand why you need to hide it, but okay.
Yeah. Well, and also I always wonder the corsets or the stays,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Like I know that in Henry the Eighth's time, the or just after that, Elizabeth First time, that women would have stomachers that they would just like leave like it's like this, and then as your stomach gets bigger, you're not fastening it, so that your
Yeah.
belly can show through it. But I don't know if they did the same thing
Yeah.
with these stays that they were wearing. Like I actually am very curious about how they handled pregnancy
Yeah.
with those, but
I was like, I would assume that as soon as you're pregnant, I'd be like, all right, I'm done with that. Because I
yeah.
noticed like with my body, almost as soon as not so much for my first one, but my second one, I noticed that my body was like, okay, I know what's happening to me now. And as soon as I was pregnant, I was like, I can have anything touching that area. Nothing
Mhm.
can touch this. And then part of like, for me, I had one really low rise pants because I couldn't have anything touching my stomach. It had to be below it. If anything was touching it, it felt like my skin was on fire, and it felt like it was like torturing me, and it was like squeezing me. And I was like, it could be loose clothes. It didn't matter. It couldn't touch my stomach. So I couldn't imagine wearing anything remotely restrictive around that stomach, even in the
Yeah.
beginning, because you feel it almost right away. We
Yeah.
put your body, you feel there's a difference. And like it shows, like you internally feel it really early on. So I'm always like amazed about these stories of women that like, I had a baby and I didn't know I was pregnant. I was like, how?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I know that like those corsets that they wore in that time, I know that they caused maladies in and of themselves. They
Yeah.
were like organ damage and broken bone, like cracked ribs and stuff from these corsets. And so I'm like, no wonder everyone died in childbirth. Like
Well, yeah.
it was something like 40 to 50% of pregnancies resulted in death. So like when you be and it's because of these stupid corsets, because the poor folks, the ones that weren't wearing these corsets, or what they were wearing was like not cinching in like that, they were not having the crazy death toll that the upper crust was having.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And
Never
yeah,
thought.
and I know that it has to do with this. And then I mean, medication was not
Yeah.
great, and
Probably contributed to it big time. I can see that. That makes sense.
so yeah, when Scarlett's like, I don't want to have any more children. Yes, she's being selfish about it. She's not a good mom, and also she doesn't like that her waist is thickening or whatever.
He has the tiniest waist in all of the land, so
Yeah.
a
And
very vain person.
but also, like, that's not the worst idea to be like, I've had three husbands, I gave each of them a kid. We've got a son, you've got your little princess, we've got a spare. Like, I'm
Yeah,
done.
when you know she's had two other kids, it seems less selfish for her to be like, okay, I've had three kids. I'm good. I'm done.
Hmm.
And she's been lucky enough where she hasn't had any miscarriages. She seems to get pregnant very easily. She's very fertile.
She
Her mom
has
unfortunately
decent
lost,
births.
yeah, her mom unfortunately lost three sons. So,
Hmm.
she'd probably count herself extremely lucky. Hey, I've had three live births. I haven't lost any kids. I'm doing pretty good. Maybe I shouldn't press my luck here and keep going.
Yeah.
I know how like horrific that was for my mother to lose a baby. Like, yeah, I'm not my mom, but still. But she's like, I've had three kids. Why not stop?
Yep.
And like, I'm all for having big families if you can and if you're capable. So, but like, it is more understandable. It makes her seem less of a jerk when she's already had two more kids.
Hmm.
This is her third, Monty's her third child. It's like, yeah, why not stop? But of course, it is partially Ashley related
Right.
because she's like, Ashley pointed out that she didn't like that she ended up marrying Red. And he felt like, she keeps having to lower herself. Like she lowered herself to marry Frank because he couldn't help her out with the taxes to save Tara. And then she again felt like she had to go to Red because she needed to be taken care of her. He kept feeling like somehow it was his responsibility, Ashley's responsibility for all these terrible things that Scarlett was doing was because he didn't marry her and he married Melanie, which obviously was the right thing to do. Obviously, they are more suited to each other, and she would have walked all over him. She would have walked all over Ashley, which she essentially does anyways.
Yeah.
But like in like a kinder way, and not being his wife, she's trying to keep him from self-destructing because he kind of is. He's kind of like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Oh, he's too willing to give up because he
Hmm.
doesn't know how to live in this world. He's not a survivor. He's, been raised to be a gentleman. And now there's nothing genteel left. There's no manner to be in charge of. He doesn't know what to do with himself. And he's fairly useless.
Yeah.
Yes, he could learn a skill, and eventually he does, but only because she's like, hey, you know what? I'm not letting you just give up. I'm going to help you get through this if I have to do it for you. I will drag you along. You're not doing this to me. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
ultimately, eventually she realizes what a coward and like just how unlike her Ashley is, but not until she's like driven herself insane and done all sorts of crazy things just to stay with him or be near him or to, you know what I mean? It takes
Yeah.
her forever to realize how wrong for her Ashley is and how much more like a brother he is to her or like a good friend. They're great friends. I think they respect each other and the differences of each other and what the other one is and how different they are from one another. They respect that the other one is what they could never be,
Yeah.
right? He respects her fierceness and her bravery, and she respects like his kindness and gentility and like his just sweetness of nature. But that's not her, and he's not brave. So really, They never would have made any sense as a couple. They really wouldn't have. So it
Well,
makes sense that he didn't marry her, but at the same time, obviously he was really attracted to her. Obviously, he's attracted to Scarlett. He wants Scarlett. He marries Melanie because she is the right person for him, but not because he's so much attracted to her. He cares for her. He's fond of her, but like she's got it, bad for Scarlett, which pretty much everybody does. It seems like. So he's like, well, everybody wants her, so she's not going to care if I go off and marry Melanie, and it's the right thing to do anyways. But the problem is, then he finds out that she does care. I was like, well, it's a little late now. I'm already promised to marry Melanie,
yeah.
and I
Well,
can't
like
marry her at this point.
there's the concept that maybe it's a modern era concept. I don't know, but the concept that opposites attract. But there's also the concept that like attraction is not compatibility.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
like I was talking with somebody else on like totally unrelated issue, but I was talking to somebody else and she was saying like, yeah, the way that I address a problem and the way my husband addresses a problem is like the opposite. And I'm like, yeah, but at least you recognize them as a pro you both recognize it as a problem, even if you address it differently. That's something that Scott and I had to work through because like I said, I do identify a little bit with Scarlett in that like I see a problem and I'm like, okay, let's see. I see this option, I like that one. Let's do it. Let's just go for it, right? And I just go. And Scott's like, "Wait, hold on. Let's look out and see if there's any more options. Let's gather all the options and weigh them out." And I'm like, "Bull, I could already be done." Except then if I made the wrong choice and looking back we're like, "Oh, I didn't even know that that option existed." He's like, "Of course you didn't, because you didn't stop to think." And I'm like, I absolutely stopped to think. I stopped, I thought, and I moved. And
Yeah.
so we are opposites in how we react to something,
Mm-hmm.
but we both agree on the problem in the first place or whatever. You know what I mean? And once we do so, once I do make a decision and Scott either goes along with it or he's like, no, I don't have another option yet, but we're going to find a better one before we do that, or whatever.
Yeah.
And we've been around for decades now. We've been married for more than 20 years. So it's it's easier now. Like we kind of know each other's numbers now.
Mhm.
But there is that concept that like we need to be similar, like we have a similar spiritual understanding. We have a similar prioritization, maybe not in the minute things, but we prioritize each other and our kids and our community more broadly, like
Mhm.
we prioritize these things. When I go back to work, it's because I want to allow the family or the home to have things that we were struggling to have with just his income, like that kind of a thing. Like we
Mhm.
might have different approaches, but we have the same goals in mind, maybe.
Yeah.
And in Scarlett's case, she was never on the same wavelength with Ashley. He was just so pretty to her.
Yeah.
That was just lust. Like,
It's
and
yeah. Lust and admiration.
yes.
I think
And
that's
she made
harder,
him
but
up like no one could ever have lived up to the impossible romanticized version of him that she had created.
yeah.
And that happens a lot. I feel like most divorces, at least in part, are one or both people involved creating a romanticized version of their partner or themselves or the relationship that no one could actually live up to.
That you can't sustain. Yeah.
Yeah. And Rhett kind of does that with Scarlett, but Scarlett has been doing that with Ashley. And the thing is she even says, she's like, I made a beautiful suit and then I just put it on Ashley because he looked so good in it.
Yeah.
And and that's true. Yes, you did.
Hmm.
But by that same token, so did Rhett, you know? he's like, I knew that you thought you liked him, but it wasn't really love. And so I was going to change you. I was going to make you see. And
She belonged
it
with him.
worked. What's that?
That she belonged with him. That they suited.
Right.
Yeah,
It worked, but he didn't have the patience because he had this romanticized version of, I will just be so amazing that, I'm gonna take you upstairs one night and you're gonna be like, yep, that's it.
yeah. Well, it almost happened, but he came home as a butthead. So there's so many
Right.
times where like he could have said the right thing and she could have done the right thing, but like because they're both emotionally kind of messed up. One, she's always had issues with her emotions in the first place. She's very reactionary, and it's not that she doesn't have a sensitive side or she doesn't have genuine caring or love, is that she's very like situation driven, very like self driven, that like her feelings for people kind of come secondary. So
Well,
it's not that she doesn't care, it's just that she's so focused on what needs to happen now.
part of it is kind of the expectations of the time. Like she's supposed to be flirtatious and vivacious and an absolute idiot. I'm such a goose. Oh, she's
Oh yeah,
supposed to be,
it purpose.
yeah, she's supposed to be a daft little bauble that just makes all the men think that, oh, that they're so wonderful. And then she's supposed to get married and let him do what he wants with her and be like, oh, now I'm going to manage a house and I'm going to and I'm and she's never supposed to like reveal her feelings and she's never supposed to talk about things and she's never supposed to. It's kind of like the good girl syndrome
Yeah.
um that like we sometimes have. I know, like, because we were both brought up pretty religiously,
Hmm.
and there's that concept that you're a good girl and you don't show cleavage and don't even think about dirty things and you don't use these words and you don't
Yeah.
whatever and you stifle those feelings and
Very.
then all of a sudden it's I do and it's like okay and now you're like
Now it's okay. Now it's
yeah suddenly you're supposed to switch gears.
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like it's such a strange notion that you're supposed to be two things, like one thing for one part of your life and then suddenly a completely different thing later.
Yeah.
Like you just change. And it's not reasonable or realistic. It's nuts. Anything you want to say about before the war starts, which is a very small section, but it's still like the establishing of the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I feel like because we're seeing this from Scarlett's perspective, and so I do tend to look at the situations from her perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And pre-war Scarlett is dumb. Like she's kind of almost like a self-imposed dumb. She doesn't want to talk about the war because it's not about her, and
Yeah.
like she's very shallow and just childish.
Also, sort of
And
taught to be shallow and childish, so she's supposed to be.
right.
Yeah, sometimes
And
you're supposed to be like caring about other people, but you're also supposed to totally be trying to get all the guys' attention, but you gotta act like an idiot to get them to like you. And a very contradictory thing she's being.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think it's funny that they call flirting coquetting.
yeah.
She's a little coquette. And I'm like, that's funny because when I grew up, like that was almost like that was basically a synonym for slut. Like,
You were being too flirty. You were like, hmm.
yeah, coquette was like the fancy word for, you call it relations.
Oh,
Coquettes end up having inappropriate relations. Like that's kind of
yeah,
the.
yeah. That's funny.
And she is being trained by her mammy and her mother to coquette. And so I was like, huh. But she is. And like she talks about wanting to expose her breasts because the other girls don't have what she has or what,
Like
like they're not as impressive as her.
9 to 5, you know,
Things like that I'm like, yeah, she is being brought up to be shallow and
and to use her feminine wiles.
yeah. And then she goes to Atlanta and it's so new and modern. And so by then the war is going on, but it's still so far removed that it doesn't really affect her.
Other than she's not widow and
Well,
she's
right.
stuck in.
Which does affect her, but also kind of doesn't. Like it just ruins her good time.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So before we go back to that, so pre-war for me, I love the notion, like the high notion of the plantation life and the Southern Bells and the barbecues and like just like the gentlemen and the gentle ladies. I love just like the overall feel of it. There's something very kind of magical about it when you're seeing it from like the highest perspective, not when you're looking at it from like the nitty gritty, like what's actually going on and everything. And really quick, I want to talk about slavery and everything.
Mhm.
I think it's really interesting. So I was watching. Okay, I'm going to talk about the movie just a little bit. I was watching with my sons. My oldest son was like, I have a hard time watching it at first because he's like, I'm used to thinking of the South as the bad guys. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. There's always two sides to every story, or three sides in this situation. Um, and even the villain thinks they're the hero in their own story. So, like, yes, slavery, horrible, horrible thing. It had to end. It needs to end. But like in the minds of the people that were living it, they've been indoctrinated for generations that this was how it was supposed to be. That the black slaves just were not smart enough to take care of themselves, and that it was their right to be masters of them, and that they were somewhat helping them, that it was a symbiotic relationship. We take care of them, they help us take care of the plantation, and like we provide them medical care and home and clothes and all this stuff and like protection. And like
And
they
they
were
do
just,
love them like surrogate family, like
yeah, like they
at least the house slaves.
exactly like some of them were treated like just kind of extensions of the family. You know, they're not quite, I don't want to say pets, but you know what I mean? Like they're some of them were treated a little more like, yeah. Anyway, so like but they were raised this way, and not just the white slave owners, but the slave themselves were raised and indoctrinated with this notion for so many generations. This is how it was, that a lot of them, especially people in like the better situations, like Tara and this neighborhood that she lives in, like the better plantations treated their slaves fairly well compared to what other slave owners were doing. But like they were raised as this is how it was. And
Hmm.
like they weren't even thinking that there was something wrong with it. So like a whole lot of the slaves that eventually got freed, they didn't actually want to be freed because they didn't see that there was a problem. They didn't realize what they were missing because they had it fairly good. It didn't occur to them because they had been indoctrinated for so long. This is how it should be.
While we're talking about the slaves, other things that I have seen um over the years, but either read or seen documentaries of or whatever, these were not like people brought over on the boat, right? Like these are people that have been generationally American slaves.
Yeah,
And so what are you gonna do? Just suddenly that you're not gonna send them back to Africa or something. And also when they like think about being free, like they don't know to how to do any other thing. It's
yeah,
kind of like now when women are like, you don't need a man. And I'm like, right, but I don't know how to function fully without being a wife and a mother. Like that's so deeply part of my identity. Even
mhm,
before I was married, like that was just a given that I would be a wife and a mother.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so to suddenly be like, no, no, you don't need that. Let's take that away from you.
You're
You
like,
are taking some, you think you're freeing me, but you're actually
I
taking
don't
something
feel like
away from me.
slavery. Yeah, like I don't feel like I'm losing something, or like
And
like
that's not true. That's not true of all slaves, obviously, but
yeah,
there were those that felt that way.
yeah. So they even talk about it later in the book that once they freed the slaves, that the North didn't the Union didn't really think about how they were going to, what they were going to do with them once they freed them. And a lot of them, they had no place to go. They're like, let me just go back to our owners. And so they would go back to their owners, and the owners couldn't pay them, but at the same time, they couldn't turn them away because they're like, they have no place to go. And they've lost everything because their plantations have been burnt down and they've got almost nothing. So they're like, oh, I guess we'll try to hobble through together, you know.
Well, and not only did the North not think about what they would do, but the North did not accept them. Like, let's tell the truth. These were not like sainted heroes like coming in to, heal the wickedness of the past. They
Yeah.
were literally trying to keep power, which
Mm-hmm.
ultimately we see as necessary. It would have been a bad thing for the country to split.
No.
True.
But
It is a bad thing to have slavery. True. Like, I fully agree with those two concepts. However, the Northerners, the Yankees, they didn't accept, like, they actually bring that up in the book too,
mm-hmm.
when she's got a carpetbagger that's like, oh, my nursemaid, like, let, or whatever, and she's like, I don't know where I'll find another nanny. And she's like, there's 100 slaves that you freed. So why don't you go find one of them? Like literally just
No.
walk by. And she's like, I would never let a black girl touch my baby.
And like Scarlett is so offended just on her own. She's like, Mammy raised me. And she's like,
Yeah.
all my sisters, all my friends were raised by black maids. And it's like she doesn't understand like how caring and loving these people can be. They're like, oh, and they're like, oh, I would never trust a darky. And they're like, oh, she's like, not trust them. Why would you trust them? Like it's so baffling to her. She's just like, they're
Yeah.
so ignorant of the lifestyle that they've actually lived and the bond that they've formed with these people. And then she even said, she's like, well, you freed them. I'm like, oh, I didn't free them. You're like, I've
Right.
never seen a black person until I came to Atlanta. And you're like, oh, okay. And then one of them is so rude as to actually say something to um
Uncle Peter.
Uncle Peter, thank you. Uncle Peter, who's sitting there riding, driving the buggy for Scarlett. She's talking to these three, very inconsiderate northern ladies. And she actually points out, oh, he looks so upset. Like he's all blah, 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 blah. Look at his dumb face. And like Scarlett's like, he's part of the family. Excuse me. And then like they're driving off. And one of them goes, you don't think she means like he's related? And it's just like, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. And I'm like, yeah, that very offensive. Like they wouldn't hire one of them. They would never. So it's like, wait a second. You wanted to free them. You're saying they should be equal, but at the same time, you don't want to see them as equal. So
Yeah.
that's part of the problem is that not all these people that are like from the north actually saw blacks as equal. They just saw, well, yeah, we don't want the country to split, and this is wrong in theory, but they didn't actually see them as equals. And then in the meantime, so the North, they win the war, they free the slaves, but then they don't think about how to reconcile the slaves with their previous owners or how to integrate the two groups together. And worse than that, they actually purposely tear the Southern slave owners down to the point where they destroy everything they have, take away all their property, and they make it so they don't have any rights. Anybody who would serve the military or been a part of the Confederate forces can't vote.
Yeah. Well,
Never
in
rights.
Geor Georgia, the Georgians seemed to take all the Reconstruction stuff. Like they got the worst of it. So first of all, they had Sherman's March, which was from Atlanta to the sea, scorched earth policy. Like
Destroy,
so
destroy
they
these
yeah,
plants.
they had that.
Who knows how
But
long?
then
Like I'm thinking historically, I'm crying for these historical buildings that are being
yeah,
destroyed, and there's no reason to destroy their homes. Like,
it was just so my daughter had Bethany. We had a whole experience with her history teacher at one point because of a report that she did on Sherman's March. And he specifically says if you can't take it, break it, right? He's like We're
Oh,
going to take everything, do whatever you want to the people, rape and murder if you can get away with raping and murdering. Like, do whatever you want, leave nothing salvageable. Kill every animal, burn every structure, chop down every tree. Like, he wanted that on purpose because he wanted to destroy their gumption. Like that, because Georgians specifically seemed to be more staunchly Confederate. Like the South was Confederate, right?
yeah.
But other states
Or,
legislatures and that they were capitulating, or the Georgians specifically were just the fireballs. Like they lived Bidand so hard. So Bidand is actually my maiden family's family motto, and it's a Scottish, it's an old Gaelic word, I guess, but it stands for by courage, not cunning. Meaning we just go forward, we don't think it through. Which is funny that I said earlier on, I said that that's how I'm like, I got this option, I got this option, let's go, right?
yeah, yeah.
I live by Dand a little bit. But the Georgians did that to the point that Sherman, as soon as he was given a little bit of slack, he was like, let's do it. And he wanted to destroy the soul of the Confederacy.
And
And
actually did. Well,
yeah.
you talk about him. They take over Atlanta. They kick everybody out of their houses. Oh, my men want to live in your houses. And then when they leave, they couldn't just leave they couldn't just leave the town alone. They burnt everything. So then
Hmm.
these people now had no place to go back to,
Hmm.
no place to live. Like, never mind that you're starving all these women and children and old people. Like, there's like
Right.
the senselessness of destroying all those farms, all this livelihood. And like they find the cotton, they're like, oh, we're gonna have a bonfire. And they just burned them just because.
Mhm.
And like what they couldn't take with them for their armies, they killed just
Mhm.
because. Not for
Yep.
any other reason. I was like so heartless and so senseless. It's just like, oh, and the devastation of it all. And then to have all those men come home to find, so like they've surrendered and they give them like a mule to go home on. They don't even really give them the means to go home. And then they have to march across who knows how far away they were from home when the surrender happens. And they're sick and they're tired and they've been fighting for 4 years with almost nothing because the Confederate State Army by the end is just shambles. They're
Mhm.
like all homeless people essentially, and they really are. They get home to find out that their homes are gone,
Yep.
and that all this horrible stuff has happened to their families. And yeah, they've also lost brothers along the way. And now, not only do you have nothing, the very little you have to try and be a farmer now, even though you have never been a farmer.
Yep.
You can ride and shoot and do all these other things, but you don't know how to work with your hands. You don't know how to do these things. And now you have to try to do this and try to feed your family with nothing.
Hmm.
Nothing. And it's like, oh gosh,
Yep. And
it's
then
so painful to think about.
and then if they got uppity, then the martial law came down on their heads. And they talk about it in the book, but the free issue black people, like they would rape and murder and steal and whatever. And the victims
Good day.
got in trouble should they retaliate or even say something.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing.
So how is that
Each-
right? So like,
Yeah.
so this brings up the other thing that in part, the North is partially to blame for the Ku Klux Klan, for
Yes.
their whole treatment of them to begin with, like during the war. And then after the war, they wouldn't let them have any rights. They couldn't defend themselves. And then they had all these slaves that they were the educated ones that they could learn to do things with, like the house slaves. And then everybody else is like they didn't know how to do anything other than plow fields and work with their hands. And so like they didn't have the education to further themselves and help themselves like the other slaves did. So then they were either, what were they going to do? Like they didn't
Right.
have, so yeah, a lot of these people, they didn't know how to take care of themselves. They didn't have medical. They didn't have all these things. There were all these things that the slave owner provided for them. They provided their home. They provided their clothes. They provided medical care. Like the lady of the house made sure they were taken care of. All
Right.
these things you do.
And their training, whatever they were trained for, whether they were trained for house or yard or field, they were given some training. But if you take
Away.
that away, like, because no longer can anyone afford to have a field hand,
Yeah, because now they have to pay them, and now it's too expensive. Plus, they
and
make
you burned their farms.
yeah, you've taken all of their wealth away, so they couldn't possibly pay them anyways. So
Mhm.
that leaves a whole bunch of these slaves without jobs, let alone without homes, and they're trying to go back to the ones that go back to their owners are like the owners don't have anything to really barely have anything either. So they're like Scarlett going back to Tara and being like, okay, I'm gonna work alongside with my slaves, or we're my slaves, and like my sisters who are about as useless as can be, and then Ashley, who's about as useless as can be. Melanie's flipping weak as can be, and her
Right.
father gone nuts because her mother died and he lost his mind. So she's like the one person who has it together at all, really, and like, yeah, she's having to sort of teach her like Mammy and Pork and the others like how to do other things besides housework. Because everyone's
Right.
like, I'm a house slave. I can't do that. We're like, everybody everybody has to work it on Terra because none of us are what we were before.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not a,
she does end up getting Will because Melanie keeps letting all of they're
yeah,
hobos. They're homeward bound soldiers. They are literally hobos.
trying to find their way home. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she keeps letting them stay the night or whatever.
And she
And
there's
through
something
that,
to share.
yeah, and through that, they end up getting Will. I forget his
Yeah.
last name,
Oh, crap.
but
We'll put it up here.
yeah, because he might be one of my favorite characters in the whole book.
Yeah.
Because I keep saying that. I'm like, Mammy's one of my favorite, but I do have like a cadre of favorites in this book, and
Mm-hmm.
Will is definitely one of them because he doesn't have to be helpful to them. However, he doesn't have anywhere else to go, and he is grateful to them. Also, he ends up falling for the youngest sister, but when she goes into a convent instead of considering him,
Yeah.
he's like, you know what though? You guys have been good to me. I can be good to you.
Yeah.
This is my home. You are my family
You
now.
guys don't have a brother and I don't have a family. And
Yeah.
I've grown to love this place and you guys have been kind to me. And I
And
have
he
life here.
and he does take arguably the worst sister just for propriety's sake and so that the poor thing doesn't have to be an old maid. Like,
Yeah, that and like in the book, they have this whole thing about she did some despicable thing to try to get money. For, so yeah, in the movie, the dad just kind of jumps over the fence and breaks his neck when he's crazy and he's lost his mind. But in the book, there's this whole thing where like she finds out, Sue Ellen, the middle sister,
mhm.
finds out that if you claim that you are always
Loyal to the North and
yeah,
not the
like you were a sympathizer. If you were
yeah.
a North, you claim that you were a North sympathizer and you were never in the war and you didn't have any sons in the war, which Gerald doesn't have any sons. So he didn't have any sons in the war. He, as far as they can tell, he didn't do anything to encourage or be a part of the war. You can claim that you were always a sympathizer and then get all this money, like a whole huge chunk of money for being a sympathizer. So
Yep.
she was willing to take her father, who was half out of his mind because he doesn't remember what's going on. He keeps forgetting that Ellen is dead. She died during the very tail end of the war.
Mhm.
And so Sue Ellen tried to take her befuddled mind father into town and try to sign the thing that he was always faithful to the Union and to the North, and that he was a sympathizer. And like at first he's all confused and he's like, what's going on? And then like his brain actually like clicks and he's like, wait a second, you're trying to make me do something that I would never do. You're trying to make me sign my honor away, my name away, and say that I was a part of this and I wasn't. And he gets mad and angry and belligerent, and it's like, well, good for you. And like, then he rides home on a horse and ends up breaking his neck. So then everybody in the whole valley like is like hating on Sue Ellen, like that it's a despicable thing to do to try to trick your poor father into doing something he would never do and that he would have nothing to do with. And so that's the other thing. You turn into this whole notion of there's the two different types of survivors of this whole war in the South. You have the ones that are like staunchly holding on to their honor, and it doesn't matter if they're starving, they're going to do things with their dignity and their honor, and they're going to stay true to their cause. They're going to stay true to their morals. And then you have the Scarlets, who are like, I need to survive. And Swellen's thinking like Scarlet in that, hey, I don't care if we're selling out our old ideals. Those are dead and they're not going to feed us. All you have to do is sign this paper and then we get money and then we don't have to starve anymore. She's trying to find a solution. And like to her, it's it's worth it if it means that they'll be taken care of. She's trying to think practically about the situation now. That she's also trying to do something really horrific in that it's elder abuse. Or, it's like she's trying to abuse her father's
Right.
mental state to get something. It's
Right.
different if he agreed to it. It was like, yeah, you're right. I need to help provide for you. I'm going to suck up my pride and I'll sign this thing. But the way she went about it is like, no, this is wrong. So then everybody in the town, the area hates her with like a vengeance, and they're all ready to skin her alive. And then Will steps in and says, I'm going to marry Sue Ellen. And, nobody can say anything against her. And everybody respects Will because he's just a decent, upstanding guy. And I too also really like Will. I like that he understood what Scarlett was doing. He didn't judge her for it. He understood everything that she did. He got it. He's like, probably wouldn't have done it himself, but he understood her reasoning
Mhm.
and her motivations. And I like that. I like this about Will, that he sort of became the person that everybody went to. That everybody felt like they could talk to him and share their thoughts. And, you kind of feel sorry for him that Kareen is still like all obsessed with the one Charlton boy that died.
Right.
Like, yeah, he was a beau of both him and his brother were bows of Scarlet at the beginning. I was like, they even talked about her, like, what was going to happen if one of them did get her? Was the other one going to just stick around or like,
The mom even mentions you'll have to move out with the Mormons, and I don't think they'll have you.
yeah, it's supposed to be the other way around? Yeah. Oh, that was pretty funny. It was like they never thought that through. But
Yeah.
anyways, then eventually he does get, start to appreciate her and start to spend time with her. And she was in love with him since she was like a child. It's like really young. She was always like, I'm gonna marry Brett Charleston. And Scarlett even jokes, oh, he's just waiting for you, honey. He's just hanging out with me until you get older. And it was a mean thing to say, but at the same time, it's just like made her world. But anyways, when she's like, he died in the war, she doesn't get over it. And she couldn't get over it, even for somebody who's obviously super sweet and wonderful and just great down to earth person like Will. And he kind of feels just so sorry for him that he's lost everything. He finally kind of finds sort of a haven. He's come home. He's essentially found a new home and become part of his family. And he clearly cares about Kareen. Kareen's a good person and she's a sweetheart. But she is so stuck in the past too that she can't get past it. So she could move on and have a life with Will. Clearly cares about her and she cares about him. She respects him too. But she's like Scarlett, she's stuck on an idea that may have never really been real. Maybe they never would have gotten married. Who knows? She's holding on to the past. So then she goes into the convent, and then Will's like, well, I guess I'll marry Sue Ellen, who is, in a lot of ways, the worst sister. I agree, Scarlett does some horrible things. Like, so Scarlett marrying Frank Kennedy. So when I was watching this, my boys, they're like, so why did she do this? Why couldn't she just wait for Frank to marry your sister and then get the money that way? I'm like, well, they explain it in the book. He wouldn't have had the money because that money he was saving that money to buy the mill or for other things. And Llewellyn would never have had him spend that money on Tara. Once she got away from her, she wouldn't have cared. She would be like, forget it. I don't care where you guys go or what you do. And like, not in that sense, Scarlett is a better person than Sue Ellen, is that she genuinely cared about making sure that none of her people would ever be hungry again.
Right. So here's the like I kind of see Scarlett, she is kind of the villain of her own story,
Yeah. And they
but
are.
also she is the hero.
Yeah.
Everyone else is allowed to be who they are and they're allowed to do what they do because Scarlett allows them to. You know what I mean? Like her sacrifices, she sacrificed parts of herself. She sacrificed who she wanted to be. She wanted to be Ellen. She wanted to be, yes, wealthy, but not just like just she became obsessed with money because money was how
And then
she
food.
she allowed everyone else to survive. She
Mm-hmm.
sacrificed herself for everyone else. So Melanie could still be the eternally sweet Melanie, so
Mm-hmm.
that Ashley could still be the daydreamer
The gem.
and she supported him. Her sisters would not have done well. They would not have been successful. They would not have been able to be themselves but for Scarlett. Wartime Scarlett is a hero
Yeah.
because of her sacrifice. Unfortunately, what she sacrifices is kind of part of her humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and
The
the
scruples.
children suffer, she suffers, she continues to suffer. And I think it's Rhett that mentions that like the fact that people love you and you are no longer capable of loving, that's your cross to bear. That's your burden.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it as time goes on when she's like, I didn't realize that I cared about my kids until I started losing kids. I didn't realize that I loved Melanie because I was so stuck on Ashley that I hated Melanie. But actually, all the things that she has done for love of Melanie, even though she doesn't see
Yeah.
it, you know?
Melanie has
And
really loved her.
yeah.
And
And like the weird like I almost get the sense when Melanie wants to see her in the beginning, back at the barbecue before the war, and Melanie's like, "Oh, I was so excited to see you. I just like they had met once before and she was like, "Oh, I've been looking so forward to seeing you again," or whatever it was, you know.
Mhm.
And Scarlett at the time, like she was like, "Oh, I've never not to Melanie directly, but kind of her inner monologue is that she never cared for women. She didn't care about having girlfriends. She was all about the boys, and specifically right now, she's all about Ashley. So she created an enemy in Melanie
Yeah.
because Melanie was marrying Ashley,
She doesn't.
and she actually learned to love her. And I feel like it was already there. Like I feel like that was already like something that was happening even though she couldn't see it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's interesting that, like, on the day of the barbecue, when she sneaks down, or when all the girls take the nap, which I thought was hilarious, that the girls had to go upstairs and take a nap. Um, and I love that the whole notion of an all day like party, where and the whole idea that you couldn't show your bosoms before 3 o'clock because
Right.
some bosoms in the morning were more offensive than bosoms in the evening. I'm like, there's so many things about that mentality and that time frame that's so weird. And so, like, what? Why was it okay to wear these plungy necklines at dinner? You're still showing your bosom.
Yeah. I mean, we have weird things now. Like people still get upset like this, not to show off, but like this has like a lower neckline. And there will be people that will be freaking out about that, but they don't care that the lady next to me, her skirt comes like an inch below her
But
butt. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm sorry, but you can do a lot more damage with a short skirt than you can with a plunging neckline, you know?
yeah, these are going to stay. They're wrapped and protected. But that skirt can go up at any point. And, hopefully you're wearing something underneath. I don't know.
Like,
Yeah.
but we still have some things that were like, oh yes, you're cute with the 3 inches of fabric around your waist. but you're inappropriate because I can see some cleavage or whatever. Like we still have some of those things that are kind of dumb.
That was pretty funny. Like we talk about this and West Far and Away, it's like, yeah, you can show your cleavage after a certain time of day, but don't show your ankles. Oh my gosh. Oh, those ankles. It's so sexy about that bone. Oh, wow. Whew. Anyways, so yeah. So that while she sneaks down to go and see Ashley, everyone else is taking a nap and professes her love, and they have that whole scene, and then Rhett happens to be there. That's just too funny in the first place. That like she did this very ladylike thing, and she didn't know somebody was there, and then he's just like first off, he already had kind of an impression of her from watching her around the party and seeing how she was just drawing all the attention to herself, and he's like, what is she doing? Like he could tell she's up to something, and then she was just fascinating to him. And then she does that, and he's like, whoa, this woman's different. She's interesting. And in that moment, she had him hook,
Mhm.
line, and sinker, whether he wanted to like admit it or not. He was just like, oh, she's something else. I'm interested. Anyways, when she is sneaking back upstairs and trying to sneak back up and like pretend like she was still asleep, she
Mhm.
overhears India Wilkes, Ashley's sister, and Melanie talking about her. And India's like, oh, I can't believe Scarlett, who's such a hussy, blah, blah, blah. See how she's like flirting with everyone. And she's even flirting with my beau and blah, blah, blah. And she just, I don't know, like, the only guy she really cares about is Ashley. And like, Melanie's like, no, 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 you misunderstand her. She's just vivacious and she's so attractive. She can't help, if men find her attract, like, want to pay her attention. It just happens when you're good looking. And she means well. And like even then, when she barely knows Scarlett, Melanie's already seeing the good in her. And yes, that's part of her one of her character flaws slash, strengths is that she sees the good in people. And she
Right.
pretty much only sees the good in people. And she doesn't see the negative side of people. But maybe she's seeing what's really in people's hearts and who they really are, not who they pretend to be or who they're trying to be.
Yeah. Well,
Because
she can see their potential maybe or
of
something.
potential.
Well, because here's the thing, like she wholeheartedly um hates the Yankees. Like she doesn't even want to give them a chance, right? And part of me thinks maybe she does that so because if she gives them a chance, she might end up loving them and she just can't let herself love the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But also like she eventually cuts India out. Like she makes her choices. And there's kind of that like she does see the best in people, but also she does have a seemingly weird connection with Scarlett. I know I've done that before too, where there's just people like there's a couple of people that I can think of just here like in my neighborhood that I just love them. I don't need them to love me back.
Mm.
I cherish them. And I probably also annoy them. Like they're probably like, "Oh good, Ray's here again." But okay, I can take a step back if I need to or whatever. But short of murdering one of my kids or something, like I love them and I
Yeah,
cherish having them in my world. And for some reason, Melanie has that for Scarlett, where she just if she has to make a choice between you and Scarlett, she's gonna choose Scarlett,
yeah.
you know?
That has to do with the fact that like Scarlett was there and delivered her flipping baby in the middle of the siege, and like Sherman's coming, and like she had to do it by herself. There was no doctor, and then Prissy, her servant, lied about being able to birth babies. How? Oh, I feel for Scarlett from this whole part, that whole section, the war stuff, and all the stuff she has to do from like when the siege starts and she goes to Tara, and then up until marrying Frank, I totally understand and I totally feel for it. And you're like, I feel like because of all that stuff she goes through during that time, kind of makes you feel like I can forgive her a lot of the crap she did afterwards because of all the trauma she went through during the war. But one of the things is she didn't have to stay with Melanie. She could have abandoned her, but she stood true to her. She has certain loyalties. Scarlett has her flaws, but she does have loyalty. And if she's loyal to something, and it's usually people. It's not an idea. She's not loyal to the idea. of the South because she never understood in the first place. And she doesn't care about that. She cares about people. She cares about Tara. She cares about family. Even if she is really, even if she doesn't like her sister Sue Ellen, she still makes sure Sue Ellen has a place to live and has food, that she's okay. You know what I mean? She's
Mhm.
still going to take care of the people she loves, even if she doesn't love them. You know what I mean? Even if she doesn't know that she loves them. But she's loyal to Ashley, and Ashley made her promise she would take care of Melanie. And she's like, what am I going to do if something happens to Melanie and Ashley survives and I didn't take care of her? How will I ever face him again? Like, so she takes that very seriously. So she ends up birthing a baby, helping Melanie give birth to a baby, and then making sure that she can get out of Atlanta in the middle of all this nonsense and then take her home and take care of her. And so, like, there's something very profound about somebody doing all that for you when you're at your most helpless. That
Mhm.
I can understand why Melanie gets so like, oh my gosh.
Well, and especially at that time, they think Ashley is more than likely dead
Yeah.
because even though he was taken prisoner, most of the prisoners at what was it? It was one of the it was something rock. I forget what it is. But most of the prisoners didn't ever make it out of prison. They died there. And they figured he's more than likely dead.
And they haven't heard from her in
She
a very long time.
she could have walked away and she didn't. The which kind of speaks to at the end she kind of when she realizes she doesn't actually romantically love Ashley
Mm-hmm.
and she kind of realizes that like that's what kept me going, but maybe that's what she needed. She needed something to keep her going.
Yeah.
And even at that point, I mean, if Ashley's dead, he's dead. He's not going to come back and be grateful to you. There was that slight glimmer of hope that he might still be alive, which is great. It kept Melanie alive, right?
Yeah.
Melanie kept going because Ashley might come home.
Mm-hmm.
Scarlett just needed that thing. Oh yeah, what's my purpose? Ashley. What's my purpose? Tara. Like she just needed that purpose
Mm-hmm.
beyond herself. If she was just living for herself, it wasn't worth it. She was ready to give up. But when she was living for an exterior purpose, which,
Yeah.
like you said, it's usually a person or people, yeah, she could go through hell and high water, and she did. Like
We moved from pre-war to war. Um, Aftermath of the war, the whole like rebuilding. And we have talked about that a little bit about how like they didn't set it up for the blacks and whites to reconcile and to like become a part of a community. They left it all awkward, and then you had all the people that yeah, you free the slaves, but now all these people don't think of them as equal, so they won't hire them anyways. They don't trust them, so it caused all these problems that have trickled down throughout the generations, and we still see the evidence of today. And as far as like making sure the South never rose again, the South never really did. Even now, a lot of these people, like who are like descendants of these families who should have these vast wealths, they've got nothing. And it's like, oh, yeah.
meanwhile, a lot of the New England old families
Mm-hmm.
are still the families in power. I
Yeah.
don't I say this as an outside observer, so
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong, but like
Well, it seems like a lot of the same families that were doing well from the beginning that were in the North still have descendants that are doing well. So
right.
like they pretty much just destroyed, the aristocrats of the South. And so there was only the aristocrats of the North that were left. They were the only ones left with money, wealth, and power. And the South was left with nothing. But anyways, so yeah, anything else you want to talk about from the book?
Um I'm almost disappointed at Scarlett's progression just because she does have like an 11th hour redemption of sorts, but it is too late. And that does kind of say something too. Sometimes too late is too late. Sometimes sorry is not enough.
Yeah.
There, I I do like that. And the thing is I'm kind of a sucker for a sad story. Kind of like that. I sometimes the hero dies.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not happily ever after. And I understand that in the sequel, I have not read nor watched the sequel, but I understand that she goes through more hell
Yeah,
and high water and learning
it's some
and then in the end she does get some measure of
happiness, but
closure and happiness and
a
you know
lot of crap.
which is great because frankly if you're going to put a character through all the stuff that she goes through, fine, give her some kind of happy ending, like
Yeah,
you know. But I kind of, as disappointed as I would be in Scarlet as a person, I kind of like that it's not all happy endings and upbeat music. Like, it sometimes your choices come back to bite you.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in this book as far as like themes and ideas and, practicality versus ideals, the danger of indoctrination, and, just brainwashing people to think that your needs are more important than the needs or the rights of another person because of some indoctrinated crazy idea. Anytime someone's rights are more important than another person's rights, that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, and like even think about like in the book Mammy keeps talking about white trash.
Yeah. Hmm.
Those white trash people, like as far as she and a lot of others in the story were concerned, she, as a slave,
As a
was a
house
cut
slave.
above them, you know? And
Mhm.
so I feel like there's always, yeah, you're right. There's always going to be prejudice that we're going to need to overcome
Mhm.
on a personal and a societal level. But the concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth makes the whole world blind and toothless. Like
Mhm.
that's exactly, and I feel like that's exactly what the Reconstructionist South was, and that's what the segregationist Jim Crow South was,
Mhm.
and that's what a lot of this
Modern.
turmoil going on. I felt that you're right. I felt like there was not turmoil over racism when I was growing up.
Yeah.
The 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s,
Yeah.
there was not turmoil. There might have been on a small, like individual level, an individual might
Yeah.
have felt it, or a community might have felt. I am completely willing to
Yeah.
admit that even if I didn't experience it, it might have been out there. But that's just it. I didn't experience it. I lived in three different states. It wasn't a national headline. It
Mhm.
We were not feeling like everyone now, all of my kids, they just understand that we live in this turmoil. And they shouldn't, you know. I mean, could you imagine how I mentioned I had Irish ancestry that were indentured servants. Could you imagine if I was like, let's go kill New Englanders because they had indentured servants and I've had ancestry? Like, that's insane. Like,
Yeah. Well, it seems to be a thing though, like there's been plenty of white slavery through history too. But I think the thing is that because it was whites doing it to whites, people don't treat it in the same like severity as, whites against black.
or or the fact that it was not a bunch of white Europeans or Americans grabbing up people in Africa. It was other African
Yeah,
tribes. Like they
yeah,
were selling
themselves. Yeah,
the
they're selling,
slaves.
selling their neighbors.
Like,
Exactly. So when you think about it like that, and I told my son that, he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah." So like they were selling the people they didn't like or the other tribes to the Dutch merchants that came and they took them as slaves. It wasn't as much, and I'm sure there were some um, Dutch maybe people that went in and like got slaves. But for the most part, it was the Africans selling Africans. And again, like even in modern times, people act like black on black crime isn't as big a deal. Or it gets ignored as when there's white on black or black on white. Like it's whenever it's another. race against another race, that it's magnified as more important. But it's like anytime somebody does something against another person, it's bad. It
Right.
shouldn't matter gender, religion, or race. Wrong is wrong. It's
Yeah.
extra wrong. Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. So just interesting all the different things that like come into play in the story and the ideas. Um, it's just a very interesting book and it's such an interesting read. And my boys at first were like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like this. Oh, she's such a brat, blah, blah, blah. By the end of the movie, we watched half of it one day and half of it the other day because it's a big long thing.
Did
Like
you have the intermission?
with intermission, yeah, the big old
Yeah.
long giant thing. Anyways, at the end of it, they're like, yeah, I like the story. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff happens. At the end, they're like, yeah, I do like Scarlet. And they're like, I like Brett. And they're kind of like, well, that's a sad way to end it. But at the same time, they're like, I like this movie. This was a good story. And I
Yeah.
was like, yes, see, like there was a lot going on. And I do like that it shows you the other side of the coin. You can see how the war affected the South, where they were coming from, and they honestly felt like they were defending their way of life.
Yeah.
Like they felt like they were defending their ideals, and you know, they felt like they were in the right.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people were not bad people. They really
Yeah.
did believe that they had the right to live their lives this way, and that no one had the right to tell them that they couldn't.
Well, yeah, and from their perspective, the American Revolution started out as a civil war with the kind of slogan, no taxation without representation.
Yeah,
Frankly, the American Civil War, I feel like it was always doomed to failure. I feel like if anybody ever sat down and like thought things through, like how Rhett mentions, like we don't have any
they
armaments, we don't have any whatever or
they have
whatever.
stuff we don't.
Like, but like they probably should have been like, oh, let's find a different way about this. However, they were intending for this to be a Confederate Revolutionary War with essentially the same slogan, no taxation without representation. The South was being sucked dry.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there was like the wealthy plantation, whatever, but even they could not have done what they were doing without, so like you did kind of mention that the slaves would go back and they can't afford to give you wages. You were essentially working for room and board. Now there could have been federal legislation that required that you cannot whip a slave or whatever. Like they could have done these smaller humanitarian restrictions on what you could do. But they were working for room and board.
Essentially, yeah,
Yeah,
they were
they were like you said, they had health care, right? The same health care that the white folks had, so had the slaves
mm-hmm.
because it was the same midwife that just delivered the rich lady's kid that's going to go deliver the poor white lady's kid and then go deliver a slave baby. Like it's
Yeah,
you're getting the same treatment. And they had a home and they had food. And so I can see where, like, if it was the case that, like, you cannot drive them that hard, you cannot,
yeah. If they want to
but
leave, they can leave. They want to go work for someone else, they can go work for someone else. Like,
right, they are allowed to travel.
yeah,
Yeah, like that I
been
can see
been a
where
different.
that could have happened,
Yeah,
but it didn't. But the South had some very rich folks that were rich because they had slaves. And then,
because they didn't have to pay the people that are working their fields. You know,
right, right,
they're feeding them. That's how they're paying them. But they didn't
right,
have the right to come and go.
right. And then the folks in the North, like the average Northern, we talk about it now, like the average American poor person lives much wealthier than they did even in like the 70s, right? Like we don't, we have very few truly poor people in America. However, that because the standard has gone like this, doesn't mean that there's still not that bottom tier. The bottom tier may have raised, but there's still a bottom tier, right? And
Yeah.
so that was what was happening in the North, where the whole of the North was moving up. And so they still had the poor people on the bottom rung, but their poor people were doing a heck of a lot better than the average person in the South.
Yeah.
And so that's why the South felt like we're not being represented, we're being sucked dry and then told that we're the villains because
Yeah. And then being
of
told
our workforce.
that they had been raised for generation and indoctrinated with this notion that this is how it should be.
Yeah,
Like they honestly felt like they were defending their way of life
right.
and that they were in the right. And when you're that's one of the dangers of the indoctrination. It's like when you get a notion that your rights are more important than someone else's, and that you somehow have divine rights or divine purpose over someone else, all sorts of crazy things can happen.
So just because we're so the book came out in I want to say 36, 1935 or 6, somewhere in there.
Yeah, right
And
there.
then and then the movie I believe was 1939. And at that time, it premiered in Atlanta, right? It was a big deal to Atlanta. They actually had to have, I forget what it is, but um, there were more people in Atlanta for the screening, for not the screening, for the premiere than there were soldiers in Atlanta during the war.
Wow.
But so it was a big deal. But 1939, it's a segregated Atlanta.
Yeah,
So the theater was segregated. The black actors were not allowed to be present at the premiere.
that sucks.
Um, I forgot her name. I want to say it's Hattie something, but that played Mammy.
Yeah,
She was the first black person to get an, oh, she's at least the first black woman, and I think the first black person to get an Oscar. I found it so interesting that that was one of the huge topics. Like, yes, this was Atlanta's movie. Yes, it was a big deal to them. However, they were segregated. Like, they were still
how much
like,
you have not learned from the past.
right, right.
Look how
Like, oh, but I just found that super interesting. And then in the movie, I felt like they really respected the black characters. Admittedly, Prissy's voice annoyed me to no end. What's her name? The actress is like Butterfly something.
how interesting.
Like she was born with like a regular name, but she's credited as Butterfly,
Okay.
whatever her last name is. But she was the one that talked like this all the time, and that kind of annoyed me.
Oh yeah. Well, like, and then her whole attitude. So the character's attitude about, oh, I need to go find the doctor. Oh, she's about to have a baby. Oh, no big deal until you tell her that she's just wasting time. And like, I don't blame Scarlett for being mad at her. It's like she's having a baby. She could
Yeah.
die. She's high risk. We need a doctor. I don't know how to do this. What are you doing?
And
Pushing your dress and like acting like it's no big deal. Like, oh man, my character
and
was so annoying.
in the book, her mother is even like, "I'm so sorry, Prissy's worthless." Like
Yeah. So her mother in the book, she's Indian, or she's part Indian.
yeah.
She's like Indian and black, and
Mhm.
like so she's like, and we miss that character. That character's not in the movie at all. So they got rid of her. But it's like kind of feel sorry for her. I feel like she was an interesting little side character. But
Yeah.
again, you didn't have to have her. But yeah, Prissy, super annoying. So as far as like being annoying, the actress did a great job
Yeah.
being
Mammy was amazing. I loved Mammy. And
annoying.
you're right. The actress that plays Prissy, played her perfectly. I
Mm-hmm.
annoyed her just as much. I was so satisfied by that slap that Scarlett.
You're like,
The thing is,
has
though,
nothing to do with the color of the girl's skin. It have to do with like that was so messed up of her to lie and say that she knew how to birth a baby. I was
right
like, because
on
Scarlett
top
was
of,
acting upon
well,
her.
so her mother in the book they explain that her mother was a midwife, and Prissy's like, "Oh yeah, I've been helping my mom her whole life, you know." But that character was just so annoying anyway.
Yeah,
Not just that, but just constantly, she's constantly whining. I'm like,
yeah,
man, how pampered must this girl be to be a slave and yet be so ornery. Like,
Yeah, like so like, oh no, no. Like, yeah, she's not seeing the gravity of the situation at all. I mean,
yeah,
Melanie's high risk, she could die. There's a freaking army coming. Like, she is not taking this seriously at all. And like Scarlett's like, and you lied
yeah,
about being able to birth this baby. I've never birthed a baby. I know nothing about it. I
yeah,
was depending upon you. And now I've got to just suck it up and okay, what did I see my mother do? And
yeah,
like, how do I do this? That would be
yeah.
petrifying. That'd be
I'm
totally scary.
like I said, like that slap was so satisfying in the movie just because I'm like, that's right.
That's right.
If that was my daughter, I'd say slap her too. But then I found out that Vivien Leigh was a bit of a perfectionist, and I have a little side note on the making of the movie that I'll get to in a minute, but she was such a perfectionist that I forget how many times it was, but she slapped that girl like 40 times
Oh
because
God.
she wanted to get the right sound, the right and so she really slapped her
Ow.
like 40 some odd times over and over again until it had a satisfactory sound.
Poor lady. Poor
Like, yeah, I'm
lady.
like, oh my gosh.
Huh.
Suddenly I don't appreciate that scene as much as I did before.
I'm like, oh no. Well, no, no. That's awful. Like,
But
how would that actress feel about that? I'd be like,
yeah.
I think we got it.
So that kind of that little anecdote speaks to what I wanted to say as kind of my little side note on the making of this movie. First of all, they took like 3 years to finally choose Vivien Leigh.
Oh,
They had open auditions. They really wanted to get someone who was not already famous. They did um uh call in a bunch of ringers, a bunch of super famous. I'm trying to remember now, like big names that I suddenly uh
we're gonna list.
yeah, like Bette Davis, like
Yeah.
just there was a bunch of big names. But they also did something like 90 like night had 90 some odd unknown women, 70 to 90 women
Mm-hmm.
that were kind of unknowns, and they kind of wanted that because they wanted this to be like the fresh new starlet that they could introducing this person that we're going to make a big star. Like they kind
Yeah.
of wanted that. And also they would cost way less.
Mm.
Um,
But they're
purchasing the
already
rights, what's
they have
that?
Gable already is a name at this point, right?
Right.
Like,
Well, so, and that they had to basically rent him from MGM.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, but buying the rights to the story already was the most expensive purchase of the rights that had, and adjusted for inflation, it still is the most expensive rights purchasing.
Of all times. Wow.
And same with the overall budget of this production. It was more than $4 million. I think it was almost $5 million by the end of it, which again, adjusted for inflation, 1939,
Yeah.
it's still the highest the highest
One of the
single movie budget.
expensive movies ever made. And you
Yeah.
can tell, like, this is well made. This is very well
It
made.
is.
It is
They had a total of four directors because they fired one and then one of them had a nervous breakdown, and so another one came in to kind of like fill in until he was better, and then they wanted a very specific feel for some of the pieces that they felt like he just wasn't getting, and so they brought a fourth guy in. Like
wow.
the producers, like they so many of them, several people, directors, producers, writers, even some of the actors got super addicted to oh, I forget what it's called, but it's one of the drugs of the time that like it's technically an amphetamine
Okay.
that that they were taking because they would have 24-hour days.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Vivien Leigh was on set 18 to 24 hours a day,
Good
7 days a week. Like
Whoa.
There was one day that they said she smoked 4 packs of cigarettes in a day. And uh, you just said his name, Rhett,
Like Gable.
Clark Gable. He was almost always drunk. Previous to this, he'd had terrible teeth and gum rot, and
Mm-hmm.
so he had had all of his teeth pulled, and he was wearing dentures,
Ow.
and he was drunk, and he or had been drinking heavily and still had a lot of mouth problems.
Oh
And so
yeah.
like you'll see when they do the kissing scene, like first of all, she's always like pulling her head away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like, oh, I'm trying to be so romantic. That was kind of a thing of the era so that the camera could see her face, but also like she couldn't stand the smell of his breath.
Yeah.
And the kissing scenes, they're always like, they're supposed to be these big romantic scenes, and they're like, you're like, what the, that was a kiss? But yes, because she was trying not to vomit. Like,
Yeah. And he's
just
probably
like, it was
too much pain to
mentally,
do much with it. It's like, yeah.
yeah, it was mentally uh damaging for pretty much everyone. There was one guy, he had been taking that amphetamine and working such ridiculous hours, and for whatever reason, the producer, what the like main producer guy, um, did not allow food except for bananas. There's like bananas and maybe like one other thing that he was allowing because he wanted them to, not die, but also he felt like if people were taking time to eat, that was a waste of time. And also if they were full of food, they wouldn't be doing their jobs as well as they could be if it's like, hey, get through this and then you can go eat, but you can never go eat because it's a 24-hour day.
Oh God.
But there was one guy that he actually, his eye burst or something in his eye burst and he went blind, like crazy things happening
Oh gosh.
just for the production of this. So when I look at this and I'm like, yeah, this is a masterpiece, but man, oh man, did it come at a human cost. So when I see these scenes, when I see them like talking really closely, or I see them getting angry, or I see these things that I'm like, yeah, he was so like the scene where Rhett is crying. They did that scene a couple different ways. They did it without him crying and with him crying. And by the end, he was so drunk he couldn't remember his lines anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was awful for all of them.
Yeah. So it was a harrowing experience.
Yeah, just to make this movie.
Yeah. So I
Oh,
wonder how many, go ahead.
oh, sorry. The one other thing, like you said, we're missing some of the characters or some of the interactions that we kind of missed. The original writer that they got for this, he put every single thing in, and it was like a 6.5 hour movie.
Wow. Yeah.
So they had to pull it back.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I wonder how many of like modern day regulations got put in place after movies like this.
Yeah.
Like when you hear about early filmmaking and the things that they did or the crap they put the actors and the crew through, you're like, how did they think these were okay things?
Yeah.
Why, like, the notion that they would work better without food, doesn't they understand that that's fuel for your engine? You don't have energy if you don't have food.
Right.
It's like,
And your brain can't
so go
function.
work harder.
Yeah.
What? That doesn't make any sense. And like, people have to have days off. You can't have people working 24 hours, 7 days a week. You have to have a day off at least. I think, how long did it take to film the movie? Do you know?
I don't remember. It actually was not nearly as long as I had anticipated.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, took like I said, it took them almost 3 years to choose Vivien Leigh, who they were kind of looking at from the beginning. But like they did a poll in a magazine, like of all of these actresses, which one she got one vote.
Hmm.
And so they were like, yeah, they didn't really like her, but also like for some reason she like just kept kind of hanging out in the back of their minds. And that I could find, they never actually state why they went with her.
Hmm.
Just that ultimately, even though the director liked these four ladies and the producer liked these two ladies, and even though they all liked someone different, kind of everybody's second or third choice was Vivien Leigh. So
Hmm.
eventually,
It's like, well, she was the most common denominator, so then with her.
yeah, it seems that way. But once they started actually filming, it went relatively quickly. However, they kept changing the script almost for a while. It was almost every day.
Oh
And
wow.
so they never they would memorize the scene and then day of they were given edits.
And they're like, okay,
Yeah. So yeah, it was just it sounds harrowing. It sounds like something I would not want to do.
yeah, yeah.
But and then people were so upset. Atlanteans and Georgians were so upset that Vivien Leigh was a British lady. You have all of these Southern actresses, you have all of these Americans that could do it. She better get the accent right, which she does okay,
How did
you
she do?
know.
I didn't know
But
she was British. I never knew. This is like the main
yeah,
thing I know her from is this.
yeah, well, it was a big deal at the time to the
Yeah.
point that she had made a statement that she didn't actually know what a June bug was because I think it's something like 24 times or something in the book. They use the term a duck on a June bug.
Yeah.
They'll come at you like a duck on a June bug. And
Mhm.
she's like, I don't actually know what a June bug is. People were sending June bugs in the mail to the set to be like, this is a June bug, honey, to the point that the California wildlife thing had to stop the mail
Oh God.
because they were endangering crops because the when the June bugs would come in, like people were like, crap, what do we do? Go dump them outside or whatever. Were
Release it.
endangering crops because they were an invasive species. So
Wow.
yeah, just crazy things like that I'm like, how did this get made?
Wow.
But
Yeah. So let's talk about the style of the film. So it's interesting. I grew up with this movie. I saw it many times. I loved it. I read the book, loved the character. I have said that in a lot of ways, Gwen is my Scarlet O'Hara. Um, and we have a Melanie character later on, but you will meet in the third book. But anyways, I grew up with this story, and I grew up watching a lot of older movies. So and when I was younger, it didn't bother me so much. The over the top, sort of like cheesy, hammy, very like almost pantomime kind of like behaviors and like just but like watching with my sons, and they're like, everybody's so over dramatic. Like they're used to the subtle acting of modern eras. They're used to, you know, things being more show than tell.
Mhm.
Whereas like there was I think they did a pretty good job as far as like explaining a lot of the things that were explained through the narration in the book by, Scarlett not having any real inner monologue and sort of like talking to herself, sort of saying it
Mhm.
aloud, but like nobody else is hearing it. It was, or she was saying it soft enough. So like not so much that she really was talking to herself, but it came to, we saw it as her talking to herself, but this was her inner monologue. And
Right.
so that was some things like that were kind of like a little weird and jarring for my kids as we're watching it. And they're like, oh, everybody's just so like over the top. And like, well, that was corny or that was dumb. And like, but at the same time, even now watching it, I'm like, you know what? I still appreciate it because it's part of the whole motif of the movie,
Yeah.
the whole thing, and like how it all put together. And so I can forgive it being over the top and silly.
Yeah. Well,
And
and that's kind of how movies were just made back then. Like all of the movies of the 30s and 40s were all kind of like that.
yeah,
Also, something that I noticed, there is like the way that actresses spoke and the way that actors spoke, that they all sound the same. Because I kept going like, oh, she's in something else. And yes, they were in 20 other things. However, it was not like oh, I know that voice from this other movie. And then I would IMDb and no, it was not the same. Because every single actress seems to speak the same way and it's always rather quickly and it's kind of this like weird. And then
Yeah,
all the men also all speak the same way and you can never tell if it's the same guy from that other movie or, like, I'm
yeah,
like,
a
they
very
all went to the same acting coach.
stage quality acting. Still,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's film, but it's still like just a step away from its stage, and like
Yeah.
stage, like musical theater kind of stage, almost
Yeah.
like quality of acting.
Yeah. That being said, the faces and the reactions that people gave very often could tell the story, which I always appreciate when, like, I believe that he was angry. Whatever it was that made him angry enough to deliver that line that way, I believed it.
Mhm.
Like the little reactions, especially when she would crook her eyebrow or whatever,
I always love.
like I believe it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that I liked that.
I have a hard time imagining somebody else instead of Vivien Leigh playing this part
Me
in
too.
this movie. Anyways, I did read the sequel by Alexandra. I'm not gonna remember the name. I'm gonna write it up there. Scarlet, and I love the sequel. And then Hallmark did mini series of it with Timothy Dalton as Brett Butler, which
Mhm.
was, and he was amazing. And then I'm gonna forget her name, so we're gonna write it down here as Scarlet, and they are awesome. They're really really good. But like I appreciate them as the sequel versions of these characters, and I appreciate Vivien and Clark as the original, the original movie
Yeah.
people.
Which also is funny that Clark Gable did not want to do this
Oh, really?
because he had always had like the rough and tough bad guy. He was often either a villain or he was like the like butch hero.
Yeah.
And he felt like this was going to make him too much of a dandy, kind of a this was a woman's story and he didn't want to be that.
Mhm.
And which it was funny because when we think of Clark Gable today, we think of the romantic like hero
The
that he was in this and in others after this.
yeah.
But he saw himself as like the rough and tumble guy. He was the John Wayne type, like he
Mhm.
didn't have room for sissy stuff. That's why he would not do a southern accent, actually. If you notice in the movie, he is just Clark Gable. He just sounds the same way that he always sounds because he refused. He had a speech coach and he just stopped going. He just wouldn't do it
I don't know.
because
He still
he
sounds
wanted
southerner enough for me, you know.
yeah, I didn't notice it. I
I
didn't notice it until after I learned all this, but
yeah, I just assumed it was just a Charleston accent as opposed to a Georgian accent. He still had some kind of a draw and still some kind of like it's not distinctively one accent or another. So
yeah.
like it's not like obviously New York or something else. So it works. Like it works
Yeah.
for me just fine. Um, and I think he's wonderful at this. And it's really funny for him to think of this. This is a woman's movie. It's like, well, this is about one of the most manliest man characters, one of the most iconic male characters of all time. And at the same time, he is a rough and tumble character. He's also deeply complicated and interesting. And this is probably the best part he ever played. So it's interesting to hear he's like, I don't want to play that. Like, dude, this is your best part. Like, I've seen him in plenty other things, but this is the memorable Clark Gable performance. This
Yeah.
is the one you're like, that's Clark Gable. And like, he shows his range. Like, he's very charming and sarcastic and funny and like warm and then like cruel and mean and like his range. He's
Hmm.
wonderful. This like just really very good. Um, the other thing that I kept noticing, and I notice this more and more as I watch like in modern times, just how aggressive men are with women in older movies. And he's just like, get down from there, and he gets her down from the carriage and then kisses her like all forcibly and like you know what I mean? Like just yeah. a lot of things are problematic today. I remember watching this movie when I was younger and not really questioning the aggressiveness of it. I think even in the 80s or 90s, I didn't question how aggressive men were in movies. And then I go back and I watch those things now and I go, oh, he
Yeah.
grabs her a lot. He smashes his face into her face. This is a very
Yeah.
aggressive, like
Which
almost attacking kissings. And yeah,
which he does in the book too. Because I feel like it is telling the story. I've always been okay with it being in the movie because it is telling the story. You know what I mean? Like,
further his character.
yeah, like if it was just if this was like set kind of in a more modern time and it was just a screenplay that someone wrote and they had a guy doing that, I'd be like, jerk, and he should know better. But because this is Rhett Butler in Reconstructionist South, like,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how like non like sexist or it's funny, as horrible as Rhett is in a lot of ways, you still respect him despite all his massive flaws. And like there's so many things he does, like the helping out Ashley and them when they get caught, you know, going out. It's a Ku Klux Klan to try to, take out the shanty town where Scarlett gets attacked, after she got attacked, whatever. And then they get intercepted by the soldiers. And then he goes out to try to he hears about like their ambush, that this is what they're planning, and he goes out to try to, catch up to the guys and like help them. And he ends up giving them an alibi by taking them to bells and everything and all of that. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to go out of his way and try to help these people. But part of why he did it is because of Scarlett.
mhm,
Scarlett and Melanie, because he respected these women and he saw how it was going to affect them. Not that he didn't care about these guys at all, but it was because he respected these women and he saw how it would affect them and how they would suffer, that he went out of his way to help these men, to help,
yeah,
Ashley, who Scarlett's obsessed with, and Frank, who Scarlett was married to, who are both essentially rivals and enemies to him because Scarlett's the one he wants. If either one of these guys is out of the picture, he's in a better situation. But he doesn't think of himself in the moment. He's thinking, well, this is going to hurt Melanie, who is genuinely a great person. I genuinely respect her. And this is also going to hurt Scarlett because this is going to put her in a horrible place emotionally or physically. Like, this, I don't want this for her. So, like, because he respects these women, he goes out of his way to help these guys and to, you know, keep them from going to prison. But then it puts him, the whole like town, into an awkward position where they have to like be indebted to him and they have to like pretend like their husbands really were at Bell's doing awful things. And yeah, so anyways, it's interesting. um,
yeah.
there's
So
so much to talk about with this. I can go on forever, honestly.
so in the movie, another thing that they do, they have to reduce some of the characters and some of the experiences, but they also have to condense the time.
Uh-huh.
And I like that in the movie, I feel more inclined to be on Rhett's side because I feel like they make it pretty clear in the book. It's just so drawn out, and it's one of these where like you've been with this girl for 12 years now, from the barbecue to sitting at the table or whatever, deciding that he's going to leave her.
Yeah.
It's been 12 years. He knows that she has been obsessed with the idea of Ashley that she has created in her mind. Like like I said, like she didn't change the math. He asked her. He was demanding that she do so, right? But
Mhm.
in the movie, I feel more of his side of things, where he's like, clearly and obviously you're not actually in love with him. Don't you see that we are perfect together?
Yeah.
Like, if you gave yourself a second, you would love me. And there's like you see a lot more of that dynamic, even when they're at Melanie's death. Like that's probably the most pivotal scene for me when they're at Melanie's death, and Rhett is there because in the book he's not,
Yeah.
but he's there, and he he adores Melanie. He
Hmm.
cherishes her, and the fact that she asked for Scarlet was so redeeming for Scarlet and redeeming in Rhett's eyes. Like he's like, of course, if Melanie loves her, then how can I begrudge her anything? And then when she comes out of the room with Melanie, she goes to Ashley. Rhett is right there, and the same thing that she had said to Rhett years before, or like a year before in the movie, she goes to Ashley and she's, "I'm so scared, Ashley, hold me." And he's like, "That was our thing. I am your husband.
And yeah, I'm
He
going,
doesn't want you and you don't want him. What really?" And so like he's sitting there and he's being reserved and he's letting her feel her feelings. And even when she first goes to Ashley and she's like, "Oh, Ashley, oh, okay," because his wife is dying. So he's kind of just like, "Yep, comfort the man."
yeah,
But then when she's like, "I'm so scared, hold me," or "I'm so sad, hold me," or whatever, he's like, "You know what? F
I'm,
this, I'm out." You know?
yeah,
And you see that in the movie, and I feel like we didn't really get that in the book.
yeah, because he wasn't there. And I do
Yeah.
like that change having him there makes it a little more poignant. And
Hmm.
then she realizes that he's gone. She's like, he's gone. And I feel like they did a really good job with the whole like wandering through the fog and realizing. So, like, the one problem with the movie is they don't talk about the fog and the dream as much. So, like, they talk about it maybe once and then, the thing happens at the end. And in the book, it was like she realized, you know, she was in her dream and that moment, the thing she'd been dreaming about for years since, her mother died, it's happening to her right now. And she suddenly realizes what she's looking for, what she's searching for is Rhett. And Rhett is the home that she's looking for. And
Mhm.
it's very effective when you're reading it. And it's still effective in the movie, but more so if you've read the book.
Right.
Having not read the book, I don't think it would make as much sense. It would seem just kind of a weird thing. Why is there suddenly fog? And like, why is it so over dramatic? And like, why are they doing this? Um, One thing I'll say, I felt like the passage of time is a little odd in the movie when I was watching it the second time, or not the second time, but the millionth time with my kids recently. I was like, they're not showing a lot of passage of time. They kind of jump from here to here to here to here. And there's a lot that happens in between. So it seems like a lot of things just happen super fast. Like she's always getting remarried.
Yeah.
It seems like she gets married right away to Frank. Like not well, you can tell there's been a passage of time between Charles and Frank, but from Frank to Rhett, it seems really fast. Like it doesn't seem like there's been any time. So I don't know. And there's a lot of things where like they go from this to this and this and this. And I don't know. It still works as a movie, it's still a great movie. I understand why they had to kind of condense a bunch of things, but it is a bit kind of jarring being like the passage of time is better in the beginning of the movie than it is towards the end of the movie. Towards the end of the movie, you feel like they're rushing through things,
Yeah.
but it's still a really long movie. So you're like, okay, fine. Yeah, you forgive it. Um, Anyways, really quick, I want to talk about, so yeah, there was Scarlet. That's one sequel. And there's another sequel called Rhett's People that I read because I remember talking to a sister-in-law and telling her how much I love Scarlet. And she's like, oh, Rhett's People's so much better. So then I read it and it was interesting. It's good. It tells you more from Rhett's perspective and like his background and everything. And then it does it's sort of like a prequel slash sequel. And it was interesting. And there were things I liked about it. And I felt like they did a fairly good job with Rhett. But the author clearly did not understand Scarlet. And Scarlet was not very, like, she wasn't done justice. And I feel like it was a very good sequel for Scarlet, or this person understood Scarlet at all. So, as far as sequels go, I'm for Scarlet. And I recommend reading the book. And I definitely recommend the Hallmark Channel miniseries. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And it has some great actors in it. You have Sean Bean plays a character in there somewhere. And like we were talking about on Far and Away, the one actor that played Mike Kelly or whatever,
The
the war boss, whatever guy. Yeah,
yeah,
he plays her cousin, Irish cousin that's a priest in the sequel. And yeah, it's a really good show. So I recommend watching it.
cool.
Anyways, so that
So one thing that I wanted to ask was, do they ever explain? So Belle Watling talks about how she has a boy, but he's away, he's at school. And Rhett talks about how he has a boy that he is the
this is Ward.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that Belle's son? Are we supposed to glean that? Or was that just
I always wondered, and I'd have to read Scarlet again. But they don't talk about that in the movie, the sequel.
no?
But like, yes,
Okay.
they never really clarify that. And you kind of wonder, you're like, wait a second. It seems possible that is that who he's taking care of? And if that's so, is this Rhett's child with Belle?
Right,
And like they sort of imply it, but it's never really spelled out that Belle
right.
is in love with Rhett, and Rhett doesn't love her back. He respects her, but he doesn't love her back.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe because she's not a lady or because of her situation, but like he respects her enough that he's invested in her. He's invested money into her business and helped her start her business. And he's clearly taking care of her boy. I think it is. I think it is Belle's son that we're talking about. I don't know that it's his son, or is it just him helping Belle out, that he's making sure the boy gets the best education and he doesn't grow up as the son of a prostitute. He grew
Right.
up as the son, as like the ward of Red Butler. He's a gentleman of sorts. And so then he gets the protection of his name, which would make sense. So
Yeah.
it might not necessarily be his kid, and I don't think it is, but they do kind of leave it in the air there, like you're wondering, is this the same kid? And is it like their love child? Or yeah.
Yeah. Um, he also talks about he knew a woman that essentially had an abortion. They never say, but there are when she's pregnant with Bonnie and she's like, I don't want this child. I'm gonna get rid of it. There are ways, and he's like,
He's all no.
you will die. Hard no. Like, he's like, don't you understand? He's like, I've seen that before, which makes me kind of wonder if that plays into the whole Belle Watling, maybe it was one of her girls type experience. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Or yeah, did he accidentally get one of the prostitutes pregnant and
right,
it was his baby that got aborted and he had to see her die?
right.
It's possible.
Yeah.
That's very
So
possible.
I don't know. That's probably all headcanon, but
Yeah, it's okay. Like you can
um,
wonder all this stuff for sure.
also before we sign off, I know this is really long, but have you seen the Carol Burnett show version of Gone with the Wind?
No, I have not. Is it
Okay, so it's so funny. It's like 20 minutes long, and they do like a silly Carol Burnett sketch of the basic story,
mm-hmm.
taking hilarious liberties. But my favorite part is when she makes the dress out of the curtains. She goes, "Oh," and she pulls down the curtains and she's like, "You go get the door. I'm gonna go make a dress." And then she comes out and she has the curtain rod over her shoulders and she's just taken the curtains and she's like wrapped it around her and the tie is like wrapped around her like a belt and she comes down the stairs and he's like, why, Starlet, her name is Starlet, not Scarlet. He's like, why, Starlet, you look amazing. But she goes, or your dress looks amazing. And she goes, I saw it hanging in the window and I couldn't resist.
That was really funny. That was hilarious. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. That
Anyway,
sounds good. Okay, so that's Gone with the Wind. We took forever to talk about it, and we might
sorry.
not all. It's fine. It's my fault as much as yours. It might not all get into the episode, but that's fine. The best of it will. Anyway, so next time we're going to have an author guest.
Ooh,
It'll be our second one of the season. Her name is Rebecca Rhodes. She's part of the critique group I was part of back in Utah. She writes several different types of books. The one I think she's most well known for is Number Games, the Number Games series, and it's dystopian. Um, yeah, so she's kind of a hybrid author where she's been traditionally published and independently published, and her Number Games series is independently published and rather had done rather well. And yeah, that's what we'll do next time. So
Cool.
for Paperback Flicks, I am Ruth.
I'm Rae.
And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.